Welcome to the College Application Workshops presented by the University of Notre Dame Undergraduate Admissions Counseling staff and team. We're thrilled to have you here, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. If you have any questions during the presentation, we encourage you to ask those questions in the chat. We'll answer your questions during the Q&A portion of the session. Thanks for being here. We'll get started in just a few moments.
Hello, welcome to the College Application Workshop, brought to you by the University of Notre Dame. We are so excited to have you today to talk about an incredibly important topic, the extracurricular section and special circumstances. My name is Elizabeth Solar. I am an assistant director here at Notre Dame. I am so excited to have you. I am actually a 2021 graduate of the university, and given we are talking about extracurriculars, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my favorite extracurricular I have seen in an application. My favorite extracurricular, anytime I see it, is community garden starting. We have so many students from across the US and across the world who like to donate any form of produce to their community by starting a garden, having a lot of either their friends, their fellow students, or their community members help to then grow this garden, and then they end up giving all this produce to anyone who may need it in their community. I am joined by my colleague, Leanne. Leanne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely, thank you so much. Like Elizabeth said, my name is Leanne Francisco. I am an admissions counselor here at the University of Notre Dame. I'm so excited to talk to you all today about extracurriculars and special circumstances. And one extracurricular activity that we've seen in an application that is super unique is that a student actually forged his own swords at home, I believe. And so that was just something that popped off the page, and we've never really seen that before. But we're really excited to dive into this. And today we're going to be talking about quite a couple of things. So we'll be discussing extracurricular activities. We'll define it, give some examples, give some tips, but we're also going to talk about special circumstances, things that maybe were beyond your control, and how you can go about talking about that in your application. We'll talk about common misconceptions, and we'll also have time for questions. Like the video stated before, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll be answering as many as we can as time permits at the end of the presentation.
All right, so let's begin. What are extracurricular activities? Extracurricular activities can quite literally be anything you're passionate about. Clubs, sports, volunteering, service, a part-time job, family responsibilities. We have seen it all. For us, what's important about extracurriculars is you are telling us about what's important to you. Often we will see students put so many different things in their extracurriculars, but it very much defines them as a person, as someone who is passionate, not just as a student. We'll see so much more about your personality and your loves, far more than we'll see in the transcript. We definitely do not want you to restrict these extracurriculars to only in-school activities. We see things throughout the community, in your home, in your larger family, in the neighborhood, and beyond.
Absolutely. So why are extracurricular activities even important within your application? So at Notre Dame, students really pride themselves on finding balance between what's going on in the classroom, but also what they're passionate about outside of the classroom. And we focus on a very holistic approach with our application process, and that does include the non-academic side, which includes your extracurricular activities. So we want to know more about you through what you're participating in. Basically, anything outside of sleeping and eating is really what we want to know about. It really also shows what you're passionate about. So like we mentioned earlier, community gardening and sword forging may not come about in your transcripts. It may be talked about in something like an essay, but really this allows us to see what you've prioritized your time with. Shows us things like your leadership skills, your enthusiasm to learn other skills, and also really just highlighting what makes you a dynamic person, because we understand that this is a very human process. Behind the screen of a Common App or whatever application platform you choose, we understand that there's a human behind that screen. So it's important that we understand who you are. So before you apply, these are some tips and advice that we have for you as you prepare this portion of your application. So writing a list of some of your current activities, it can be a 1 to 2 page list depending on what you've experienced so far in high school. Talk about things like leadership experience, maybe other activities such as sports, community service, if you are involved in your religious community, if you have significant family responsibilities, really anything goes. So include also things like your honors or your awards, things that really you're passionate about and that are meaningful to you. That's what's most important to us as we are reading your application. Also, identifying any gaps within that resume. So as you're writing this list, you may realize, I'm actually really passionate about community gardening. I'm just going to keep using that example. But let's say you're really passionate about service and you realize that you actually haven't devoted a lot of time to it when you were in high school, and you want to show that through your application. Identifying what may have been missed in your time in high school and making a plan of action. Where can you fill in those gaps with the time that you have in a way that's still meaningful and impactful to you?
So there are a lot of things you should be thinking about before you apply. I understand we have both applied very recently to college. We understand the desire to immediately throw yourself in the application once August 1 hits and just start enumerating all of your activities. But let me remind you that this is an application for you to present who you are. So don't assume that the first 5, 6, 7, 10 activities you think of are the ones that best define you as a student and someone who wants to move forward and what you want to present to your future home for the next 4 years. So make sure to really think about what is important. When we're talking about that 1 to 2 page list that Leanne mentioned, I always recommend that you put on the top the thing that's most important to you. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the most time is spent, but I would argue that probably that's the most time you're spending in here thinking about it. Mm-hmm. I know when I was a student, I thought about the newspaper club 24/7, even though I was only sitting in the classroom working on it maybe 2 or 4 hours every other day or so. So it doesn't necessarily need to have that concrete time, but certainly if you're thinking about it and that's something that you feel has defined your high school experience, make sure it's that number one thing on your list. We are going to be looking at it from left to right, top to bottom. So the first thing we're going to see is that number one up there. So if that's what you want to be defined as, definitely feel empowered to put it there. Certainly, I would also make sure you actually expand upon all of the activities. I saw a question already in there. Clearly, you guys are thinking ahead. Make sure to talk about these experiences. Never assume that Leanne and I know every extracurricular that's happening in your high school.
Yes.
Sometimes there is something that is specific to your high school, so always define it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes even something as simple as the National Honor Society can mean something incredibly different for every single high school. Yep. So if you can explain to us what was required, what did I want to do, what did I end up doing, if you can break that down a little bit more, it's going to be incredibly helpful. Mm-hmm. I will also say there's a common misconception that the activities list on the extracurricular section is the only place we will see your extracurriculars. That is incorrect. We will see your extracurriculars all over the place. We will see it in your essays. We will see it in your letters of recommendation. We'll see it everywhere. So don't feel like if you didn't put a lot of time into that one specific area, it's not going to show up anywhere else in the application. That's not true. Your high school counselor, your teacher may also talk about it, or maybe it's something you end up putting in your essays as well. Always make sure also that these extracurriculars are an accurate portrayal of what you are spending your time at. Mm-hmm. I say this as a counselor who has seen people write that they are a part of some activities 24 hours a day, 52 weeks a year. Yeah. That is physically impossible. You are allowed to sleep. We want you to sleep. It's important. So while there are maybe some things that you're going to be spending a lot of time at, make sure it's an accurate portrayal. Mm-hmm. Sometimes something may be a little bit of a shorter time period, but that's okay if you're still very passionate about it. Mm-hmm. Don't feel like that's going to be something that's going to be a a bad thing or something that we're going to look at as a red mark. We want to just see what is an accurate time in which you're spending your time during the day, because this is meant to display a full holistic view of what you're experiencing in high school. Finally, please add activities that you actually participated in that were meaningful to you. Every year, I see activities that is 1 hour of service, 1 week out of the 52 weeks of the year. Clearly, that is not something that's important. Mm-hmm. It's okay not to have to include it if it's something you're not passionate about. Mm-hmm. So make sure that you're following something that's accurate, that you are excited about, and then something that will give us a lot to be excited about in our office as well. Okay, so because we recognize that many of you have maybe not seen an application, we wanted to give you a better view of what we see when the application comes across. Mm-hmm. I think this is an absolutely fantastic example of what to do and what not to do when it comes to an application. For example, you can see here that this student spent a lot of time in NHS. They were spending 15 hours a week all year long, spending time in their NHS program providing service. Clearly, that's incredibly important, and that's the first thing I see, and I'm incredibly excited about it. However, this student also made what I would consider a mistake and something they should, if hopefully this is not their final application, this is something, if you do as well, you should go in and fix. The term leader is very undefined. Mm-hmm. If you have a leadership position that has an official role, please define it. If you are the president of NHS, please write that there. We assume that you are all leaders. What we want to see is this a concrete role, or are you an activity member? Leader tends to not be very specific, and I would hate for you to miss an opportunity to demonstrate your leadership if you wrote leader instead of president or vice president or secretary or something of that nature. Another great example in this little example here is Wildcat Action Team. This is an example of not fully explaining what the activity is. Another great example that I have seen personally in a lot of applications is the term Spirit Squad. While sometimes Spirit Squad means the cheerleading squad, great for you, that's not always what Spirit Squad means. I have also seen Spirit Squad indicate people who lead the bleacher assembly of students to come cheer on a sports team. I have seen Spirit Squad also be used as a service club because they're bringing spirits and excitement to their campus. So if you have something that is very niche or defined within your high school, please define it in your application. We don't want you to miss an opportunity just because we're less familiar with what is a very common term or vernacular in your school specifically. Also, you'll see in these other two examples, clearly there's a lot going on. The homecoming committee chairperson, that was really helpful. That's going to be a great example of where extracurriculars are going to be helpful. Mm-hmm. Clearly, this student has done some leadership because they were the chairperson. Clearly, were managing a budget. Like that is a very specific and concrete example of where you are bringing your influence and your passions to your school. The last thing I should mention is reading. It is also perfectly okay to write extracurriculars of things that are less defined. It does not always have to be something that is a specific activity. However, I would recommend that you think about the time as well. Much like the service example I talked about earlier, where you're doing 1 hour a week, this reading 2 hours a week, I maybe would encourage not to put because it's clearly not spending a lot of time. Mm-hmm. I hope that you're reading at least 2 hours a week, given you are high school students. It is great to see, though, that if you were to do a lot of reading, I've seen students who spend 15, 20 hours a week just trying to take some time for themselves, work with their mental health, and reading is a great outlet for that. Mm-hmm. That's something absolutely that I encourage to do. Mm-hmm. But for something so minimal like 2 hours a week, don't feel like that's necessary and it's going to demonstrate anything substantial for us in the application.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about special circumstances. But first, let's define it. So here we defined it as any circumstances that affected your high school experience that were out of your control and may have acted as a barrier for other opportunities. Now, this is, again, a very broad definition. We've seen a lot of different examples of this as we've read applications, such as COVID-19 disruptions, illnesses of significant family responsibilities. Illness can be either personal illness or maybe someone else in your family or in your life went through an illness and you had to assist them, or perhaps you moved to a new state or a new city and that disrupted you in the middle of your high school experience. We want to know those things. So at Notre Dame, we read applications holistically and contextually. So that context piece really goes into the special circumstances. We want to know if things affected your high school experience. And again, these are just some examples. Every year we see something very, very different, but we just wanted to give this baseline for really what special circumstances are.
Absolutely. So why are we talking about special circumstances? I mentioned a little bit earlier when we were talking about the extracurriculars, we want to understand the fullest extent of what you experience as a high school student. I saw a question already in the chat that was asking, how do I demonstrate that I had a 2-hour-long commute every morning?
Yes.
That's a lot of time.
Very common.
That is actually very common too.
Yeah.
We have seen that. You are more than welcome to put that in the extracurricular section. That is absolutely a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that I'm sure has made it difficult for you to do certain extracurriculars. Maybe it hasn't allowed for you to have super late games if you're a sports person. Mm-hmm. So that is a great place for you to put that in the extracurricular section. Another one that we see quite a bit of is family responsibilities. Mm-hmm. There are many students. Obviously, COVID was also an important moment for all of us, especially for students who had younger siblings, mm-hmm. where they had to really step up and be that older sibling, help out with the family, whether it was helping their younger siblings through classes, whether it is trying to get people from point A to point B, because, middle school and elementary school is just as busy as high school sometimes.
Yes.
So we recognize that a lot of that is happening. I would recommend, if you are experiencing significant family responsibilities, please put that in your extracurriculars, because you're taking time away, and that also demonstrates fantastic leadership in your home. So don't feel like you have to be super humble about it. It is okay to talk about it in your extracurriculars if it is taking time out of your day. Mm-hmm. However, I would also caution, if you are doing 1 hour a week, maybe don't include it. So really, it's about shaping your experience to be the best version of what really you experience. Don't feel like there's something that you need to impress us with. Mm-hmm. We have seen fantastic applications with or without family responsibilities. Mm-hmm. But everything will be read with context. We want to see you in the fullest extent of what you can provide. Mm-hmm. So if you can provide us more information with an understanding of where you were, that'll be so helpful. As a reminder, Notre Dame does not do interviews. So consider this your interview process. Mm-hmm. So make sure that you're really going into a deeper level of who you are and allow for us to understand that. The last thing I should mention when it comes to extracurriculars is we do have, along with the extracurricular section, the additional information section. Yeah. You should absolutely include any gaps. Anything that you feel is important to note that is not highlighted anywhere else in your application, that is a great place to include it.
Yes, so Elizabeth mentioned a really good point about the additional information section, and I just want to kind of look at that a little more. So here we do have a screenshot of what the additional information section looks like from the Common App. So just kind of talking through where this is located. With the Common App tab on top, you're going to go to the Writing tab, which is going to be on the left side, and then there's an additional information drop down. So this is what it looks like. Once you select the Yes button here, then this box will populate. And that's where you really have a chance to talk about anything that you really need to talk about that would make your application whole. So there is also what we call community disruption section. They added this during COVID as a way for students to talk about any significant or special circumstances that were directly related to the pandemic. So let's say you had younger siblings. If your parents were working full time and you had to take on additional responsibilities at home that were way out of what maybe would be considered the normal responsibilities of a high school student, that's where you may write that. I'll use an example here. During the spring of my freshman year, I had to take on significant family responsibilities due to XYZ. So this is really your space to expand on anything. We don't suggest that everyone uses it, but if there is something that is important to your application that you feel your application would not be complete without, we really want you to utilize this space. We've had students who have used this to explain special awards that their school gives out, or perhaps, if you had a spirit squad and a pom squad and you were part of one and not the other, really this is your space to utilize, and we want you to use it if you feel that it is necessary.
Yeah, the last thing I will chime in for additional information section, if you're thinking of things that are common experiences that we have seen, we often see students use the additional information section to describe things like part-time jobs.
Yes.
Maybe especially part-time jobs where students are helping with household expenses.
Absolutely.
So not just, I'm paying for the ability to go to the movies with my friends, which is
great.
Fine. I did that. I get it.
Yep.
But especially if students are taking a job to help pay for the electric bill, that is a great place to put that, so we are aware. Additionally, any things I mentioned, gaps as well for additional information section. We have seen students who have unfortunately gone through a difficult time during high school, and maybe their grades suffered as a result, but then they recovered. Maybe we'll see in the transcript that there was a little bit of a struggle, but if you can provide information of what happens, it will help us understand, oh my gosh, this kid went through so much sophomore year, but then they hit the ground running junior year. That's going to make us excited to celebrate you and your perseverance. So please take advantage of it if there is something you do feel like needs to have additional information. This is another great place if you're running out of space in the extracurricular section to talk about things like a long distance to commute to and from school, maybe obstacles if English was not your first language. We can see many different things. It's really up to you to define if there is something you feel would make your application incomplete without talking about. That's where the additional information section falls into play. All right, so I have mentioned common misconceptions. I think personally, the extracurricular section is often the most overlooked section where students can make very easy mistakes that can be rectifiable, can be fixed very quickly, but please do not overlook it. I know it's so easy to go from turning in your transcripts or going right to the essays and writing your essays, but the extracurriculars are often the things that we get the most excited about in the office. Whether we are enjoying the fact that a student has started a community garden. Sorry, we love gardening here. And if we end up getting a lot of gardening essays, I recognize it's my fault. But also, we want you to take that time to really think about, what am I presenting to my future home and what is important to me? So I'm going to guide you a little bit on things that we see often. I have already mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there's a common misconception that you need to do service. You do not need to do service. We love students who like to serve their community, but to be perfectly honest, you can serve your community in so many capacities. It doesn't need to be specific to serving in a soup kitchen or going to Salvation Army and sorting clothes. Those are two amazing examples that we have absolutely seen. But being the president of student council is also a version of service. So don't feel like you need to prove to yourself that you're doing something concrete if it only fits within the realm of service, because by simply being a part of a community, you are also serving it. So we want to see you go beyond that. Don't feel like you need to restrict yourself and find a soup kitchen to go work for the next year, because that may also not be important to you. This extracurricular section is meant to show passion. Second, I need to do this to impress them referring to us. Please do not write the extracurriculars based off of what you think we will find impressive. you have no idea what we find impressive. Evidently, we have talked about so much about forging swords and community gardens that, and I'm sure you didn't expect that to be the ones we picked out today, because we see students do a million different things. Don't feel like there's a golden ticket extracurricular, because there isn't. We have seen students do a million different activities. We get excited about everyone doing something that's exciting to them. We see students doing really inventive things that we don't expect to. Dungeons and Dragons, forging swords.
Coin collecting. Yeah, just really cool things.
Yeah. And those are all incredibly impressive. So don't feel like you need to, there's something specific that we're looking for. What's specific and what we're looking for is an authentic version of you. The next one is there is a perfect formula. I think we've already talked about this. There no perfect set, not one sports, one service, one leadership activity. No, you can have maybe several things in student government. I'm going to say student government because I love student government in high school. Or maybe you really found a lot of things outside of the classroom. Maybe you don't have a specific leadership designated position. That's also perfectly okay. If you're not the president of something, that doesn't mean that you're barred from Notre Dame. Instead, we just want to see, where are you spending your time? Maybe you aren't a designated leader, but you are acting as a leader in certain capacities. That is also something that we're looking for. We want to see motivation. We want to see drive far more than we need to see accolades. The next one that we have, it's better to have more activities. This is definitely a mistake sometimes.
Yes, you do not need to use every single space in that list.
Absolutely not. I believe they give you 10 spaces. You do not have to use all 10. If you feel you have no choice but to use all 10, go ahead. But don't feel like you need to stretch your application to add in additional activities that really didn't matter to you. Don't feel like you need to throw in that 2 hours a week of reading just so you can show that it's fully 10 activities. If you have 5 substantial activities that you are passionate about, that's a successful application, and that is one we're going to look at and be excited about. Often students will try to push it really far and try to stretch out their activities to show that they're doing so much, and we will look at that and then see the time that's being spent and say, you know what, yeah, they're doing lots of things, but they're not spending a lot of time on it. What we want to see is your passions first and foremost. The next one is they won't read the additional information. Clearly we will.
We read everything.
We read everything. If there is something you absolutely feel like you need to include in the additional information section, and we will make sure to take note of it. Often we will find the most interesting parts of an application in that additional information section, and it will give us a lot of context of who you are and what your experience is. The last one is they only know my activities because of the activities section in the application. I mentioned this earlier. No, we do not. We see it in so many different places. We see it from your teacher recommendation, your counselor recommendation, your essays, if you choose to include it. I know I saw a question earlier asking, do you have to include your extracurriculars in your essay? No, of course not. There's an extracurricular section specifically for you put your extracurriculars. But if you want to talk in your essay about a specific extracurricular, for example, soccer, if you're a captain of a soccer team and you want to talk about that experience and where you grew, you can absolutely do so. But maybe you want to talk about something that is entirely separate from your extracurriculars, like Taylor Swift. That is also perfectly fine. I am providing examples that I have seen.
We've read.
We've definitely seen. So allow for the space to open up, not restrict you. So allow for yourself to feel like you can give an authentic version of yourself.
Okay, so we've talked for a lot of this information session, but we want to just look at some of the questions here. Let me see. Were there any that came up for you that?
Oh, I feel like I've been answering various questions as we've been talking, so I'll let you choose the first question.
There was one about, prioritizing which extracurriculars you should put with just the limited 10. And Elizabeth already mentioned first kind of putting it in an order that that makes sense for you. So the one that is most important to you, maybe the one that you're most passionate about first, because that's the first one that we're going to see when we read an application. But really think about, what are you passionate about? And what do you really want us to see? Because at the end of the day, we get to know you through your application. At Notre Dame, we don't have any sort of interviews. So this is how we get to know you. So really think about what is most important to you and what is the best representation of who you are as an individual. Because without that kind of guidepost, we may not get to know you to the extent that you want us to get to know you. So use that as a guidepost. Really think about what you want to let us know, essentially. Let me see here.
Another great question that I saw in the chat was asking about COVID. Yes, absolutely. If there are extenuating circumstances that you feel should be included about your experience getting through high school with COVID-19, feel free to include it. Mm-hmm. However, I would caution you, because yes, COVID-19 is something that we all experienced and went through in our own ways. I was a senior at Notre Dame and I experienced it. It was certainly being in the classroom while COVID-19 was happening was an incredibly difficult time. However, I would caution against spending too much time talking about something that is not going to be an extenuating circumstance. So wearing masks in the classroom, having to social distance, having to be home, I would avoid talking about those things. However, if there are things that went beyond that you maybe experienced, for example, we saw students who parents lost jobs during COVID-19 and experienced even homelessness. Those are things that we're looking for when it comes to the COVID-19 experience, not necessarily something that is a more common experience.
Absolutely. I see a question here from Nico asking, is there a place that you can provide a portfolio? Yes, there is. It's never required. Obviously, portfolios can be a great expansion on some of your extracurricular activities. You can submit a portfolio for any artwork or musical performances that you've done through something called Slide Room. So that's where you can upload anything. I will say that students have submitted Slide Room submissions for musical performances, and they may be a little scared to show their face if they're just on the camera. But make sure that we can see your face, because there's no other way that we can verify it's you. But other than that, it really is fair game to submit a portfolio.
Yeah, and definitely I would encourage it if you feel like there's something incredibly important you want to demonstrate skills-wise, especially if it relates to whatever major you may be applying with, whether you're looking at something like arts or architecture or music. Those are great examples, but definitely I feel encouraged to include that. We love to see it. Often we will even listen to your music while we're reading your application because we like to get into the vibes. And so
everyone is so talented, by the way. It blows us away every time we open up a portfolio.
It's so exciting. Yeah. Another great question I got from Camilla was asking, should we include middle school activities? So I would avoid using middle school activities if they only existed during middle school. We want to understand your high school experience. But for example, if you started the orchestra during 7th or 8th grade and that continued into high school, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, sure, you can absolutely mention that it was also in middle school, maybe even your middle school and high school bands were connected. That's perfectly fine, but please avoid giving us any of your extracurriculars for exclusively middle school, because we're not asking for middle school you to be admitted into Notre Dame. We're looking for high school you and who you have become.
Absolutely. And on that note, there was someone who asked a question regarding something related to middle school, and they had mentioned that a parent had passed away during their 8th grade year. Can they still write about that in their application because it's affected them in high school? Absolutely. If it has greatly affected you in your high school experience, absolutely. Again, that context piece is really important to us. I think the 8th grade, the specific situation of being in 8th grade is really close to high school. So I think that's, for us, important to know, but feel free to talk about that as well. There's one more special circumstance question that I saw regarding someone who experienced long COVID and how that would affect their application. First of all, we're never going to penalize you if you had to stay home because you had long COVID. Oh my goodness, that would be horrible. but let us know that you had to stay home. That's a great example of utilizing the community disruption or the additional information sections, and let us know what the implications were, because we'll also be able to see and connect the dots if maybe there was a dip in your transcripts or activities had dipped during that time as well.
Another great question comes from Joseph. He's asking, should I include my experience in the Notre Dame Summer Scholars Program or any other Summer Scholars programs that they may be doing in another university? Yes, feel free to include that. We love to see students who are involved with programs like the Summer Scholars Program at Notre Dame, because it shows that you're really engaging with intellectual curiosity and you're working and learning at a university level. If you are taking that, please feel encouraged to include it. It's certainly an impressive extracurricular, much like doing maybe independent research with a university professor or doing anything of that nature. However, it's not a requirement. Like I said, there is no golden ticket.
No.
This will not lock you down into Notre Dame, but it is a great thing to demonstrate when we want to understand how are you spending your time, especially during the summer.
All the questions are coming in
I
so
know.
fast.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep up with all of them. I'm seeing a lot of questions about essays. We'll be giving a little bit more information in a little bit about the essay workshop. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be a whole other session like this all about essays. So let me see here. Was there another one that you saw, Elizabeth?
I saw one, and then
They keep
so
refreshing.
many that I lost it. I did get a question about work. Definitely, if you
I
have
saw
a
that.
part-time job, we do not judge differently based off the part-time job. If you have a part-time job of babysitting, feel free to include it. Or if you have something a little bit more concrete, I was a lifeguard at the YMCA. You're more than welcome to include that as well. We see some students who are doing a variety of part-time jobs. We would certainly recommend including part-time jobs because it shows great initiative, shows great responsibility, especially outside the classroom. So, and it's also babysitting is incredibly impressive sometimes. You know, kids can be a lot.
Yeah.
So it's great to see that you're balancing. So feel free to include that. We, as I say all the time, we do not judge your activities. There is no one thing that is.
We were in high school once. We know.
Yes. Lots of options.
Yes. There's an interesting question about how to write out the explanations for your activities. Someone asked, should I do it in bullet points? How should I format it? I'm not sure if Common App actually lets you do bullet points. I've seen students do it in sentence format. I've seen students do it in phrases and use semicolons. So it really is up to you. I think that as someone who reads applications, we just want it to be concise and making sure that it's not too wordy, making sure that you're giving the right amount of information, but also explaining it in a thorough manner. So no preference for me personally. What about you, Elizabeth?
No, I have no preference as well. Sometimes students like dash to make it look like bullets, which is fine. I do believe there's a word limit, so as long as you're fitting within it.
There is.
But no, there is not a specific, as long as it's concise and it's helpful, I think that's enough for me. I'm not picky. We have gotten a few questions, and I recognize that we have quite a few international students on here. I think it's important to note that students both in the US and internationally have a lot of amazing extracurriculars. So we do not look at students differently significantly differently depending on their extracurriculars. We will, though, be aware of what your opportunities were. Some students in other countries may have had more restriction. For example, China, certainly it took a little bit longer for students from there to be able to go out and do extracurriculars. Absolutely, we'll take that into account. We are aware of many of those environmental barriers, and that's perfectly fine. We just want to see, okay, how did you spend your time? We have seen a few questions about passion projects. That's a great way to spend your time.
Absolutely.
For sure. Things like coding, or maybe you're writing a book. Oh my gosh, I get so excited when I see students who are spending time writing books and really demonstrating that passion for writing. I was an English major, so I get a little excited. But really, it's up to you on what you think is important and what you want to demonstrate that is authentic to you and your passions. But feel that we are here to open doors as opposed to close them or say that you have to fit a narrow set of extracurriculars.
Absolutely. Okay. I did see a question about demonstrated interest, so I kind of want to answer that one really quick. Notre Dame does not consider demonstrated interest. We are not calculating how many events you attended. If you did attend this event and you're here live with us, we're so happy that you're here, but that is not part of our application process. Although some students will attend things like our pre-college programs, if you want to put that in your extracurricular activities, you're more than welcome to. But I also encourage you that if you've done an activity like that, like a pre-college or a summer program, even at another institution, feel free to also put that in your application. Here at Notre Dame, we're not going to penalize you if you've done a really great summer program at another institution. If anything, that looks really awesome that you took the time to go to another institution and spend part of your summer studying something or doing a project at another institution. So feel free to also do that if you choose to do so.
Yeah. Let's see here. What are the questions? Oh my gosh, she's sending in so many.
I know. Let me see. Oh, there was a question about uploading files. So through our application portal, students are able to upload files if they choose to do so. And what's nice is that once it's uploaded, we have a whole separate tab on our end where we see all of your uploads. So if you would like to submit, people have submitted a lot of different things in their applications, maybe a resume, any extra things to add to your application, feel free to do so. But I also want to emphasize quality over quantity. We do read everything in an application, so make sure that it's something that really adds to your application and doesn't necessarily drown out your voice and your story.
Yeah. And just a reminder, because I've seen quite a few questions about honors and awards and using that in extracurricular section, I will remind you there is also a section that is specific for you to enumerate any honors and awards you may have received. Mm-hmm. So if you feel that there is something specific that you want to step out of and not just have it part of the extracurricular, you can absolutely put it there as well. However, if you're receiving specific honors within, say, your sport team, you can absolutely include it in either section. It's really up to you. Maybe you run out of space and so you want to put in the honors and awards section or vice versa. Once again, we are not going to be overthinking how you ended up outlining it as long as you are presenting an authentic self. Okay. So I think we have time for one last question.
Yes, let's do one last question. Oh.
I think the last question I'll put out is, there are a few questions about students with ADHD and dyslexia. Absolutely. That's a great thing to include in the additional information section. If you feel like that's something you need to include. Certainly, if you want us to be aware of it, it's great to know. However, we will also be very conscious of the fact that we want to read you in a considerate manner, and so we will be aware of it, but we would never discredit you for anything if you are experiencing some form of difficulty when it comes to learning.
Absolutely. So that wraps up the questions, and really we're going to just wrap up our session today, putting in another plug for our upcoming application workshops. Tomorrow we have crafting the perfect college essay, same time tomorrow, and then Thursday, same time, we will be having a session on financing your college education. Highly recommend attending both of those. We're going to have some of our experts from the office talk about those topics. All right. So that's all that we have today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any other questions, feel free to look at our website. We have tons of blog posts and other ways to get connected with us. You can also check out our social media at ND Admissions. But other than that, we're going to go ahead and sign off, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.